Good afternoon. My name is Ian Walton. I'm the Special Educational Needs Coordinator at Headlands School, and this afternoon on this webinar I will be talking about the provision at Headlands School through the Support for Learning Department for children who have special educational needs and disabilities. In this afternoon's webinar I will be covering what special educational needs are and how these are defined within the 2015 Code of Practice, the four broad areas of need within special educational needs, which are communication and interaction, cognition and learning, social, emotional and mental health, and sensory and or physical needs. We will also be looking at the SEND support students, education, health and care plans, neurodiversity applications, which includes autism and ADHD, GCSE access arrangements, and the Headlands School assessment services. So to begin with, I'll talk a little bit about what qualifies as special educational needs. The Special Educational Needs Code of Practice states that a child or young person has special educational needs if they have a learning difficulty or disability which calls for special educational provision to be made for him or her. A child of compulsory school age or a young person has a learning difficulty or disability if he or she has a significantly greater difficulty in learning than the majority of others of a similar age, or has a disability which prevents or hinders him or her from making use of facilities of a kind generally provided for others of the same age in mainstream schools and post-16 institutions. Now that is the official definition with the Code of Practice, and there's a bit more information to go along with that. For children aged 2 or more, special educational provision or training is an addition to or different from that generally for other children or young people of the same age in mainstream schools. Many children and young people who have special educational needs may have a disability under the Equality Act, and by that we mean a physical or mental impairment which is a long-term and substantial adverse effect on their ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. This definition provides a relatively low threshold and includes more children than many people may realise. The phrase long-term is defined as a year or more, and substantial is defined as more than minor or trivial. This definition includes sensory impairments, such as those affecting sight or hearing, and long-term health conditions such as asthma, diabetes, epilepsy, or even cancer. Children and young people with such conditions do not necessarily have special educational needs, but there's a significant overlap between disabled children and young people who have special educational needs. Where a disabled child or young person requires special educational provision, they will also be covered by the SEND definition, and therefore they would fall under the definition used within the SEND Code of Practice. The SND Code of Practice breaks special educational needs down into four very broad areas of need, and these are communication and interaction, cognition and learning, social, emotional and mental health needs, and sensory and or medical needs. Later on in this webinar I will break down these even further and cover each of these four in turn. The SEND Code of Practice refers to these as four broad areas which give an overview of the range of needs that should be planned for. The purpose of identification is to work out what action the school needs to take and not to fit a pupil into a category. Therefore, sometimes a child may fall across one or more of these broad areas of need. In practice, individual children or young people often have needs that cut across all of these areas, and their needs may change over time. For instance, speech, language and communication needs can also feature of a number of other areas of special educational need, and children and young people with autistic spectrum disorder may have needs across all areas, including particularly sensory requirements. The support provided to an individual should always be based on a full understanding of their particular strengths and needs, and seek to address them using all well-evidenced interventions which are targeted at their areas of difficulty, and when necessary specialist equipment or software can be used. Within the East Riding, the largest area of need is communication and interaction, and there has been a huge increase in the number of children within the East Riding receiving diagnoses of autism, autistic spectrum disorder, or Asperger's. The second largest area of need falls within the social, emotional and mental health category, and this is a very broad spectrum of need. This diagram is taken from the Department for Education Special Educational Needs Handbook and shows the various overlapping subgroups within each of the 4 broad areas of need. I thought this would be really helpful, as within special educational needs there are lots of acronyms, and therefore this might help to clear up some confusion among what some of them mean. Within cognition and learning, we have specific learning difficulties, and that can mean something like dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, or dyspraxia. These are specific to a particular area of need within the profile of the child. Moderate learning difficulties, often categorised by a broad range of difficulties all associated with learning. Severe learning difficulties and profound and multiple learning difficulties are often found within the special educational needs provision of more specialist schools. Social, emotional and mental health needs can cover depression, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder such as ADHD, but also ADD, which is attention deficit disorder. It could also cover eating disorders, anxiety disorders, mental health issues and social disorders. Within communication and interaction, there are speech, language and communication needs, and also autistic spectrum disorder and Asperger's. And within sensory and physical needs, children may have a visual impairment, a hearing impairment, multisensory impairment, or a physical disability. I will now try and cover each of the 4 broad areas of need, and hopefully by the end of this, those of you listening will have a greater understanding of what individual needs fall within these broad areas. So to begin with, communication and interaction. Children and young people with speech and language communication needs have a difficulty in communicating with others. This may be because they have difficulty saying what they want to say, or perhaps understanding what is being said to them, and they do not sometimes understand or use the social rules of communication. The profile of every child with a speech, language and communication need is different, and their needs may change over time. They may have difficulty with one, some or all of the different aspects of speech, language or social communication at different times of their lives. Children and young people with ASD, that is, autistic spectrum disorder, which also includes Asperger's syndrome and autism, are likely to have particular difficulties with social interaction. They may also experience difficulties with language, communication and imagination, which can impact on how they relate to others. Communication and interaction needs could include difficulties with producing or responding to expressive or receptive language, difficulties uttering speech sounds, difficulties understanding spoken and other communications from others, and difficulties with understanding age-related social conventions of interaction, such as turn-taking during conversations or appropriate level of physical contact during play. Over the past 3 to 4 years, there has been a large number of ASD referrals made across the East Riding. Prior to 2021, any referrals for ASD, autism or Asperger's had to be made via the Speech and Language Service. In 2021, the East Riding and Hull NHS Trust set up the Neurodiversity Front Door Service, and now referrals for ASD can be made to them via school. I will cover this later on in the webinar. The second broad area of need within the Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Code of Practice is cognition and learning. Support for cognition and learning difficulties may be required when children and young people learn at a slower pace than their peers, even with appropriate differentiation from school staff. Learning difficulties cover a wide range of needs, including moderate learning difficulties, something which is often seen in secondary schools, severe learning difficulties where children are likely to need support in all areas of the curriculum, and associated difficulties with mobility and communication, profound and multiple learning difficulties where children are likely to have severe and more complex learning difficulties, as well as physical disability or a sensory impairment. Given that Headlands is a mainstream secondary school, we very rarely have any students with severe learning difficulties or profound and multiple learning difficulties. A specific learning difficulty affects one or more specific aspects of learning. This encompasses a range of conditions, usually dyslexia, but also dyscalculia and dyspraxia. As a school, we have recently established the Headlands Assessment Service, and Mrs. Fisher, one of the Support for Learning team, has recently qualified as a specialist teacher of dyslexia and now has the ability to diagnose dyslexia. I will cover this later in the webinar. Cognition and learning needs may encompass most of the curriculum, such as for pupils with MLD and SLD. However, cognition and learning needs may only impact on specific areas such as reading, writing, spelling, and mental calculations. Cognition and learning needs generally account for difficulties in curriculum-related areas such as reading, writing and spelling, comprehension, processing difficulties such as sequencing, inference, coherence and elaboration, working memory, short-term verbal memory, and other types of executive function difficulties. When it comes to students in their Key Stage 4 GCSE years, we are able to offer what are referred to as access arrangements to help students who may have difficulty with cognition and learning when they sit their GCSE exams. These are referred to as GCSE access arrangements, and I will cover these later in the webinar. The third of the four broad areas of need is social, emotional and mental health. Children and young people may experience a wide range of social, emotional and mental health difficulties, which manifest themselves in many ways. These may include becoming withdrawn or isolated, as well as displaying challenging, disruptive or disturbing behaviour. These behaviours may reflect underlying mental health difficulties, such as anxiety or depression, self-harming, substance misuse, eating disorders or physical symptoms that are medically unexplained. Other children and young people may have disorders such as attention deficit disorder, ADD, or attention deficit hyperactive disorder, ADHD, or attachment disorder. The broad area of need of social, emotional and mental health is indeed very broad. The Special Educational Need Code of Practice from 2015 no longer includes the term behaviour as part of this category of need. The reasoning is that a child's behaviour is perceived as a communication about the child's state of mind and may be caused by a variety of factors such as anxiety, sensory overload, anger, which may include anger about pervasive life situations or undisclosed difficulties. It could be a response to trauma or attachment difficulties, frustration due to speech and communication difficulties, response to a wrong level of challenge in lessons, grief, feeling overwhelmed, physical pain or discomfort such as hunger, underlying mental health problems, or undisclosed physical, mental or sexual abuse. Therefore, as part of the Support for Learning team, we do not refer to the word behaviour, but we see that all behaviour is some kind of communication, and we try and find the root cause. The fourth broad area of need is sensory and/or physical needs. Some children and young people require special educational provision because they have a disability which prevents or hinders them from making use of the educational facilities generally provided. These difficulties can be age-related and may fluctuate over time. Many children and young people with vision impairment, VI, hearing impairment, HI, or a multisensory impairment, MSI, will require specialist support and or equipment to access their learning or rehabilitation support. Children and young people with a multisensory impairment have a combination of vision and hearing difficulties. Physical and sensory needs cover a wide range of medical conditions, in addition to those mentioned above. Some children with physical disabilities may be very cognitively able, so the levels of support must be tailored to a person-centred needs analysis of each child's needs and preferences, taking into account the views of children and their families. Children with sensory or physical impairments will be supported by specialist teachers from the East Riding Sensory and Physical Teaching Service, SAPS. This team of specialist teachers will also work alongside NHS providers such as physiotherapists and occupational therapists, as well as speech and language teams, and perhaps educational psychologists. Special educational needs support in school. The majority of young people on the SEND register at Headlands School are identified as SEND support, and this is coded with a letter K. The letter K in and of itself does not stand for anything, it is just a government classification. Where a pupil is identified as having special educational needs, schools should take action to remove barriers to learning and put effective special educational provision in place. In Headlands School, this support includes quality first teaching by subject-specific staff, additional adult support and lessons from learning tutors. In primary school, learning tutors may be referred to as teaching assistants. At Headlands School, this role is not to assist a teacher but to assist learning, and therefore we refer to them as learning tutors. Specific interventions in small group or one-to-one. At Headlands School, this may include reading intervention, guided reading, phonics support, handwriting practice, maths intervention groups, or a number of subject-specific Key Stage 4 interventions to help Year 10 and Year 11 students with their revision. The provision of equipment such as laptop computers, Chromebooks and reading overlays. Specialist assessments from internal and external professionals. Pastoral support from the heads of year and pastoral managers. Support from external health and mental health professionals such as the school nurse, the social prescriber and the CAMS SMASH professionals. And examination access arrangements such as extra time, rest breaks, readers and scribes. I will refer to this later on in the webinar. Education, health and care plans. A minority of children on the SEND register have an education, health and care plan, and this is coded as E. Some children and young people may require an EHC needs assessment in order for the local authority to decide whether it is necessary for it to make provision in accordance with an EHCP plan. Information can be found on the East Riding local offer website regarding this, and this says, an education, health and care needs assessment is the process whereby the local authority establishes your child or young person's special educational needs to decide whether they need support through an EHC plan. Your child or young person may need an education, health and care plan needs assessment to find out what their difficulties are and what help they support may need to make progress in their learning. The assessment process may result in the production of an education, health and care plan for your child or young person. Although the plan can include health and social care needs, your child will not get a plan if they only have health or social care needs that do not affect their education. The SEND Code of Practice states that a local authority must conduct an assessment of educational health and care needs when it considers that it may be necessary for special educational provision to be made for a child or young person in accordance with an EHC plan. The EHC needs assessment should not normally be the first step in the process. Rather, it should follow on from planning that has already been undertaken with parents and young people in conjunction with the school. An EHC needs assessment will not always lead to an EHC plan. The information gathered during the EHC needs assessment may indicate ways in which the school can meet the child or young person's needs without the EHC plan. If the local authority decides not to conduct an EHC needs assessment, it must inform the child's parents or the young person of their right to appeal that decision and the time limit for doing so. Also of the requirement for them to consider mediation should they wish to appeal, and the availability of information, advice and support, as well as the resolution service. The local authority should always provide feedback collected during the process of considering whether an EHC needs assessment is necessary. Parents would often find support from the East Riding SENDIAS team to help them with any mediation. Within the East Riding, a request for an assessment for an education, health and care plan is usually sent to the Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Assessment Review Team, SENDART, by the young person or child's school. If a parent wishes to make a request for an EHC assessment, it is important that they discuss this with the school first, so that all relevant information that is needed can be gathered together and a joined up approach can be planned. Neurodiversity, that is autistic spectrum disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder applications. The Hull and East Riding NHS Trust has recently opened a neurodiversity assessment service to assess children and young people for ASD and or ADHD. Referrals can be made via school and initially involve an online questionnaire to be completed by the school and by the parents. This shows any presentation of identified characteristics across two settings. The information which is received will be triaged by the NHS team, and they will decide if there is sufficient evidence for the referral to move forward to the assessment phase. If there is sufficient evidence of characteristics and traits across two settings, then the child or young person will join the waiting list for assessment. Currently the waiting lists are over 12 months. Access arrangements for GCSE examinations. Exam access arrangements are reasonable adjustments for students who have a disability or special educational need that significantly affects them in exams. Any arrangements that are used in exams are based on the young person's normal way of working in the classroom and in tests and exams. Wherever possible, access arrangements that help a student to work independently are encouraged. The information needed to apply for some access arrangements depends upon the access arrangements being applied for. Some arrangements require a specialist assessment by a Level 7 qualified specialist assessor, whereas others require an assessment by other professionals such as an occupational therapist. The JCQ regulations are updated every year at the beginning of each academic year and provide information regarding the evidence needed for each access arrangement. Access arrangements can include extra time up to 25%, a reader, that is someone who can read questions to the young person during the exam, a scribe, somebody who can type or write for the young person during the exam, the use of a word processor or some assistive software such as a screen reader or voice recognition, a verbal prompter, that is a member of staff who can help with time management during the exam. Supervised rest breaks. This arrangement is when the clock timing the exam would stop to allow the young person to have a break, perhaps a stretch or something to eat and a drink before restarting the clock again. Or a small or separate room to take the exam in. Some young people do not like to be in the main hall with the majority of their peers and therefore may access a room with 6 or 7 other children, or perhaps even an individual room just for themselves. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions or queries, please email the Headlands School admin account and your email will be forwarded on to me. Kind regards, Ian Walton.